Good morning to those of you that have joined us. Thank you ever so much for spending the time once again, the third occasion, of course, for the Blue Sky Autumn webinars. Today's session is with myself, Rob Starling, and I'm joined today with Jeremy Jackson.
Good morning, everybody.
So, moving on to the agenda. There we go. Good. Here's the agenda as we see it today. Now, should you have missed any of the earlier webinars, this is the third and the final webinar of the Blue Sky Autumn series. Session 1 was all about pension basics. I know that's yet to make its way back up to the website after a need to do a sound re-record, but I believe the recording's been done, so it won't be too long. Session 2 was me a fortnight ago. Was the first of a two-parter all around the PAG. Specifically, I covered parts, or I sometimes call it chapters, 1 through to 6. I think that's on the website, but if it's not, then it most certainly will be very, very soon. And today's session is all about PAG again, but it's from part 7 onwards. Part 7's a real big one. It's all about offsetting, and we're going to be spending a lot of time on that. Before Jeremy and I dive into today's review, a quick reminder, and that is that if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function within Zoom. Please don't raise your hand. Jeremy and I have got quite a packed agenda of things to go through today. What I've also got, as per usual, is two of the Blue Sky team hiding in the background. We've got Mike Thompson and Jack Thompson. They're both poised and ready to try their best to answer questions as you raise them. If there is chance at the end of the session, we'll open the floor for wider questions and dive into it from there. Moving on to the next slide. Once again, I am very conscious of the time, so you've seen this slide a few times before. So I'm not going to major on it. Obviously, we're Blue Sky. We do these pension sharing reports. We've been doing it for a really long time. By all means, look at the slide at your leisure if you want to know more about that. But I really want to get on with part 7. Now, Jeremy, part 7, it's the largest chapter within the PAG report. Do you want to start us off with a review of this, of part 7?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's all take that collective deep breath, I think, Rob, as we dive into the tricky world of offsetting. So this slide really is a bit of a frame up and giving some context to our presentation today. Very quickly, I'll read through those bullet points. So offsetting is the most widely used solution for balancing up the finances as part of divorce settlement. PAG says that. In the context of pension on divorce, offsetting is the process by which the right to receive a present or future pension income is traded for capital or cash now. But I think the thing where offsetting gets quite complicated is we need to work out how to compare a pension as a future whole of life income stream against cash, housing, or other non-pension assets. Lastly, PAG says that offsetting is often viewed as appealing for primary carers who wish to retain the family home. So before we leave this side and move on to the next slide, I wanted to reiterate why offsetting capital against pension income is so tricky. So unlike cash, investments, or ownership of a property, a pension is there to provide a regular income in retirement. Whilst in recent years, people have perhaps had the perception that a pension is a lump of cash to draw down upon, we shouldn't lose sight of the fundamental intention of a pension, namely to provide a regular income for life after work. So for this reason, you shouldn't simply look at a CE value of a pension and compare it with any other capital asset. And I think the final point I would make is that the last bullet point that we can see on that slide, that certainly does chime with our experiences when talking to divorcing couples. Without wishing to stereotype, the female party often sees the immediate benefit of retaining the family home, but perhaps underestimates the long-term value of receiving a portion of the husband's pension rights. Not one for today, but this is certainly a trade-off that working with a financial planner using cash flow modelling can help to illuminate.
So what does PAG say about offsetting and the occasions on which it might be useful or even preferred as a potential solution? Let's go through here then. So when might offsetting be useful? Point one, when one party wishes to retain a capital asset, so of course, most commonly, Jeremy's just touched on it, the formal marital home might be wanted in exchange for not having a pension. But it could equally be a case where we've maybe got a business owner and they specifically want to retain the business more than they want their pension, or maybe there was a holiday home or a portfolio of shares. Maybe there was even something in a pension that was illiquid. But all of these things could potentially be a reason. There's a capital asset that wants to be retained, excuse me, and the individual who wants to retain it is willing to forego any potential pension share that they might be entitled to in order to achieve this goal. The second point, the value of the pensions would be disproportionately reduced by a pension sharing order. And this is a really big one. And actually, there's lots in PAG that has the implication of this point is relevant to so much of it. It's where it can taint figures, and there's more on this as we wander our way through this chapter, actually. But the value of the pensions would be disproportionately reduced by a pension sharing order, i.e., those of you on the last session, you will recall I gave an example where we had a pension scheme that was massively undervalued compared to what would physically be required. In other words, the total income payable to both parties by applying a pension sharing order in an undervalued scheme scenario is that both of them put together will end up with less income as a result of having to do that. The third point, maybe one of the parties wants to keep a specific pension. That might be a reason for offsetting. It might be that someone says, I really love my final salary pension scheme. I want that. I'm willing to preserve that more than anything else. Can I keep it if you have the house? Fourth point, the pension sharing charges could possibly be excessive. Now, I've got to tell you, as pension sharing report writing podes, we do see quite a lot or quite a range of differing implementation fees by pension schemes for implementing a pension sharing order. They could range from nil for, let's say, an atypical personal pension up to £3,000. Now, of course, if the pension share that we've calculated or a pension expert has done is relatively modest, let's say it was 30 grand, for example, needed to go to husband to wife, but the scheme's charging £3,000 to implement it, does that really make sense to do that? And the final point on here, that maybe the pension is an overseas pension, it can't be shared, and we need to make some kind of an allowance for that by offsetting instead.
Right, so let's just remind ourselves perhaps of some of the key differences between offsetting and pension sharing. So I'll just read through these points. So offset capital is potentially immediately accessible to the recipient and could be used for purposes other than retirement, for example, housing. This immediate usability is often referred to as utility. Remember that capital inside a pension grows in a generally tax-free manner and is primarily taxed as income when money is withdrawn during retirement for spending. On the flip side, capital outside a pension generally grows in a taxable environment. For example, it might be subject to income tax or perhaps capital gains tax, but would not face the same tax burden, at the point of withdrawal. A POD can and will make an adjustment for tax when offsetting to reflect the difference between assets held in a pension and outside of a pension, but it's unlikely that a POD will apply an adjustment for utility, as that is typically for the parties or the court to decide upon. Moving on to the next slide here, just a warning, if you like, and the extracts that you can see on the screen there are snips out of the PAG report. And I just want to emphasize a couple of points before we carry on. So firstly, PAG says that offsetting pensions without properly understanding the value of the potential pension benefits that will now not be obtained has been and will continue to be a substantial cause of negligence claims. Put very simply, if you think that balancing capital against a pension cash equivalent, for example, is a good way to deal with offsetting, I would urge you to think again. Secondly, PAG goes on to say, where there have been claims of negligence made against family lawyers in the field of pensions, it has overwhelmingly been in cases where offsetting has been the chosen remedy, not pension sharing. When the client is pressing you to get the divorce finalised so that they can have certainty of being able to stay in the family home, for example, remember that a solution drawn up in haste could have long-term consequences for your client and for you. We know that ambulance chases are active in this market and the number of claims is likely to increase. Right, so let's look at offsetting and what I've called there the PAG view. But just before we go through some of those points in a little bit more detail, let's just jump into our time machine just to understand how we've come to this point in the offsetting debate. So back in 2015, our very own and now happily retired former colleague, Mark Penston, was invited to take part in an exercise that led to a publication entitled Apples or Pears, Pension Offsetting on Divorce, headed up by Reese Taylor and Hilary Woodward. 11 leading pension on divorce experts had been asked to calculate offsetting figures based on various case studies, and the results varied wildly. The highest offset figure was often twice as much as the lowest figure. In other words, depending on which PAG you used, the result could be starkly different. Potentially, the difference in methods employed by PAGs remains a problem. In a relatively recent matter, where I was acting as a shadow expert for one party, I was asked to critique another PAG's PSR, pension sharing report. Our well-respected PAG had calculated the pension sharing order in the equality of income calculation to be around £779,000, but then went on to say that the capital required to fully offset this pension sharing order would be somewhere between 262,000 and 877,000. So you can see there that that's an extremely wide range. Ultimately, the Apples or Pears publication became the catalyst for the original PAG report in an endeavour to create a best practice guide for pensions on divorce. However, PAG 2 admits that one of the unresolved issues post-publication is the fact that experts were unlikely to reach a consensus on what method should be used when offsetting. Therefore, you will unfortunately continue to see several variants used by PAGs when asked to provide an offsetting calculation. PAG appraises the various methods of offsetting available, but stops short of endorsing a particular approach in every case. So we can see there that PAG suggests that there are 3 theoretical starting points for offsetting. Just using the CE value, we'll come on to the drawbacks of that in a minute. A figure based on equality of income calculations, and the third one there, which we call PAG's preferred option, if you like, which is looking at the value of the pension holder's retained present or future benefits, assuming no pension share has been implemented. We'll just explain that in a bit more detail just in a second. So PAG also goes on to talk about other methods that could be used when calculating an offset, notably Duxbury and Galbraith tables. And I guess the Galbraith tables are perhaps the biggest change since PAG 1. Galbraith tables represent a worthy attempt to try and simplify matters. However, according to PAG 2, the Galbraith tables are no substitute for a fair and detailed POT report. So, in other words, use them, but use them with caution. Right, so let's add a bit more fat to these 3 methods that PAG suggests we could use when starting our offsetting calculations. So first of all, very simply, this is just using the CE value. So looking at the pensions and then making an offset calculation based on the CE values. So PAG suggests that this is really only a credible option for modest money cases where only DC pensions are involved. I might also add both parties are of a similar age and in good health. So let's just imagine a scenario where the couple in question have pension assets which are relatively modest. So let's go through a worked example here. So imagine that husband has £25,000 in his DC pot, wife has £75,000 in her DC pot. We add the CEs together and we get to £100,000. we divide that by 2, then the equality of CE point, if you like, is 50,000. So it's obvious that 25,000 needs to go from the wife, in this case, to the husband, so that they both have 50,000. However, in this case, pension sharing isn't desirable. They want to do an offset. So in this matter, because of the tax relief enjoyed on a pension contribution, it's not a cheque that the wife has to write out to the husband for £25,000. In fact, it's just a cheque for 20,000. And the reason for that is because if the husband then decided to inject that money into a pension, he would get basic rate tax relief of 20%, thus making that £20,000 net contribution £25,000. So, in other words, added to his existing 25,000, he now has 50,000. Point 2, using an offset method, which is based on the equality of income calculations. So in this method, the first step of the calculation is to work out the equality of income point based on pension sharing to establish the magnitude of the pension sharing order required. Once that's worked out, we can then do some offsetting calculations based on that value. So let's bring that to life, and let's imagine a scenario where the husband currently has entitlement to £30,000 worth of pension income, but the wife has entitlement to only £10,000. In our highly simplified example, an equality of income calculation is likely to lead to both parties receiving an income of, let's say, around £20,000 each after pension sharing. So in other words, the wife is now entitled to an extra income of £10,000 per annum to bring her up to 20,000. That's the point at which equality was calculated. So the offsetting calculation in this context will now seek to give a capital value to the extra £10,000 of income that the wife would have received by the pension sharing method. So this is where it gets a little complicated, because the second stage of the calculation could itself be based on 3 different methods, which we will illuminate later in the session. And they could be a simple offset, as we just saw just a moment ago, capital drawdown, or a purchase life annuity. Finally, PAG's preferred option, and it is preferred because it will value the pension benefits without any of the destruction of value which might be brought about by a pension sharing order. So as a reminder, destruction of value relates mostly, but not exclusively, to defined benefit schemes where the CE value quoted is considered to be low and would not be sufficient to purchase anything like the same level of income on the open market. So with this method, going back to our couple in the previous example, where husband currently is on track to get £30,000 worth of income and the wife £10,000, this method effectively seeks to bring the wife's income up to the same level as the husband's, assuming no pensions are shared. So in other words, they both get £30,000 worth of income in retirement. Therefore, in this method, it isn't an extra £10,000 per annum that the wife needs, it's an extra £20,000 per annum. The offsetting figure is now based on giving a capital value to the extra £20,000 worth of income that wife hypothetically needs to receive. This option will always lead to the biggest offsetting value. I think that's over to you now, Rob.
Well done, Jeremy. That was a couple of deep slides. The good news is on the next couple of slides, I've got both a worked example that compares the different financial outputs of each of these things. But before I get to that slide, let's just quickly go through this one. What I've tried to do here is just highlight 6 potential methods and maybe just a quick whiz through what each one of those methods are. Jeremy's kind of touched on them, but we'll go through them again. And in fact, actually, it's worth saying that as Jeremy and I were preparing for this session, we did actually think, wow, we could have, and this might bring some of you out in absolute fear, we actually felt that perhaps there was an entire session, possibly in the spring webinar series, where we just do a masterclass purely on worked examples around offsetting. But anyway, let's dive into this. At a high level, we might say, in our opinion, that the various options have the following advantages and disadvantages. So simple offset, let's remind ourselves there, the main advantage with this one is it's nice and simple. It's effectively the capital difference required to provide equality of income. Jeremy described that as point 2 in the last slide. but with a discount of being applied to reflect the pension tax relief. The disadvantage is it's highly unlikely to be suitable for a lot of people, because if there's a particularly large figure, one could argue you physically couldn't get that amount into a pension in the first place. So there can be potential issues there. The second point, equality of income assuming a PLA purchase, a purchased life annuity. And let me just reiterate here, with offsetting, what the POD is trying to do is to put a capital number to the pension share for the person that wants an offset. So each one of these is just a method to try and see if we can come up with a number. The purchase life annuity, well, what happens there is if the individual is, let's say, outside of a pension because they're offsetting, we're trying to put a capital number to how much would it cost to go and replicate the income that the person who is remaining in the pension would have got outside of a pension. That's called a purchase life annuity. Disadvantages here, well, purchased life annuities aren't quite as clever as pension annuities. You can't, for example, make an implication or a scenario that role plays someone who has poor health. And actually, it's not possible to get inflation-linked purchased life annuities like you could get inside of a pension and specifically a defined benefit scheme. Equality of income assuming a capital drawdown method is used. Well, once again, it's relatively straightforward for us mathematicians to understand and run a model where effectively a chunk of money is given, it's depleted over a period of years, it's got investment growth going on, all of these yummy things. But of course, the one issue with a pot of money that you're depleting, of course, is you can't actually pinpoint the point of death like an annuity can. So you've got some issues there. Galbraith tables is point number 4. Relatively simple to use. And potentially, of course, this is the reason why it was put into play with no POD input required. However, it can be a little bit inflexible. It's a bit too simplistic, but it was designed as a basic ready reckoner with limitations. It does also require the tables to be updated. Okay, so there is a reliance there. Duxbury tables. Well, over the years, the Duxbury tables have been criticised for their underlying assumptions used. The assumptions are reviewed annually. Indeed, I was reviewing the September report of the Duxbury Working Party again this morning, mindful of this particular session, to see if they've made any amendments to those assumptions. And as far as I could see on page 40, they remain exactly the same as they were. As far as the PAG preferred option, Jeremy's touched on that, relatively simple to understand. And it does avoid one of the points that PAG likes to champion, which is just being careful about the destruction of value of pension schemes. And that's a real problem that's unique to an undervalued defined benefit scheme. But the problem that you've got, which I'm going to show hopefully in the next slide, is it's going to end up with a whopping great big figure compared to all of the other methods. But it does circumvent that devaluation. So let's give a worked example. Here's the assumptions I'm going to use in this example. We've got a husband. He is age 55. He's got 2 pensions. He's got a final salary pension scheme, which we've, of course, loaded the base on because it's undervalued. We know that he's going to get £20,000 from that pension at 65. It's got a transfer value of 300k, and we've run the maths, and it turns out that in the real world, he would actually have needed 337,500 to generate that 20,000. So we've deliberately thrown into this worked example an undervalued final salary scheme, because this is the bit that PAG's trying to say. We run the risk of devaluing pensions by sharing them. The husband also has a money purchase pension. It's got 200k in it, and the estimate is that that will generate a further 11,800. So there is a bias here. The husband looks like, if they don't get divorced, that he's going to be responsible for some 31,800 of income into the family post-work lifestyle. The wife, 52, a couple of years younger, just the one pension. It's a money purchase. It's worth 50k, and we work out that that's going to generate £3,200. So yeah, together, if they don't get divorced, there's 35k of income. But evidently, you can already see that that if she's got 3,200 on her side, he's got 31,800 on his side. In normal pension sharing land, equality of income, there needs to be something in here. So What did we work out? Well, we worked out that in capital terms, the husband needs to pass the wife £230,000 of pension fund, and that would result in both sides having an income of £16,000 per annum. And of course, for the eagle-eyed of you there, what that means is together they add up to 32k. If they didn't get divorced and they were remained in a nice happy marriage and they just continued with the pensions as they were, it would have been 35k. So we do see there a reduction in aggregate income as a result of needing to share an undervalued defined benefit schemes. Now, the parties apparently would prefer an offset, and the results of the various methods, well, we've calculated that. Okay, so the simple method, which is effectively the £230,000 that the wife is going to need if it's in pension land, is discounted by basic rate tax relief, and it ends up at 183,700. I'll come to the PAG method in a second. The purchase life annuity answer comes up with 172, the drawdown route 207, the Galbraith tables 211. I'm reminding you that the PAG method, if I just go backwards, is how much does it cost to bring the wife's income from her 3,200 to 31,800. So that is a big difference. It's not, as all the other calculations, trying to get her to 16k. It's trying to get her to the pension income that he was going to have. There is a bit of a discount for tax relief in there, but you can see already, whereas the other four are broadly in a bit of a funnel, the PAG method there is a relevance to it. It can be a problem. It's going to end up with a whopping great big figure, which I guess some of you may use to your advantage, perhaps in your letter of instruction. Right. Right. What's up next? What's you, Jeremy?
Right. So just to bring the offsetting segment of today's presentation to a close, I think, look, we'll just add our view, if you like, if we may, whilst we're all here. So at Blue Sky, we typically base our offsetting calculations on the PSO figure identified by doing the equality of income calculation first. That's the way that we've always done it. That's the way that we intend to continue doing it. From this figure, we then calculate the capital cost of purchasing this income on the open market via a purchase life annuity and using a capital drawdown method. We also provide the simple offset figure. So in other words, you ask us for an offsetting calculation, we will give you 3, we will give you a range. And I think it's true to say that that range is usually quite narrow. It certainly isn't anything like that example that I gave earlier on in today's presentation. However, we may sometimes use the PAG preferred method if we identify that there is significant destruction of value when sharing a particular scheme. We had a case recently, we questioned the CE value on a number of occasions. The provider insisted it was correct. The scheme wasn't underfunded, so there was no issue on that front. It was just a particularly low CE value. And on that occasion, we also gave the PAG preferred method figure too. And just to conclude, so offsetting calculations, they need to be rooted in pragmatism. Sometimes we're asked for an offsetting calculation where it's clear that the magnitude of the pension share is into the hundreds of thousands, and there's definitely not capital assets outside pensions to be able to offset that. So, so don't do fantasy offsetting, if you like. In other words, it's usually best to try and target a particular figure. And commonly that might be a share of equity in a family home, for example. So look, to summarise, it is common practice for POs to give a range of offsetting figures. There's not going to be any agreement on the best method. It is horses for courses to an extent. There are times when you might use a different method, but in our reports, those of you that would have seen them have perhaps seen that we give the pros and cons to using each of the different approaches, and ultimately, it's down to you guys and your parties to reach a conclusion on that.
Okay, well, as mentioned right at the beginning, part 7, the biggest chapter of the lot, it was going to be the one that's going to take the most time to try and explain. Hopefully we've helped a little bit. We will, of course, consider maybe some feedback and maybe do an entire session based on making it a bit more fun with some worked examples. But anyway, let's let's dive into the to the remainder of the report. A lot of this is relatively straightforward. Part 8, Jeremy, pension freedoms. What does that mean?
So pension freedoms, and again, once more, we need to get back into our time machine and back to 2015, actually. And some of you might recall when, at the time, the Chancellor, George Osborne, stood up in Parliament and did this radical change of rules related to pensions. And there was a quip at the time, I can't remember exactly who it was who said it, that you could ultimately use a pension fund to buy a Lamborghini if you want.
Jeremy, that was the front page of the Daily Mail.
Was it? Okay, well that's no surprise. So look, caution pension freedoms and the flexibility that it's provided. With greater flexibility leads to greater complexity. It can potentially lead to more imaginative solutions as well. So understanding that complexity in our role of chartered financial planners and PODs. Of course, we know all of the nuts and bolts of pensions, so we can apply this flexibility, but I would just caution. So let's just go through some of the points then. So introduced in April 2015, fundamentally, it changed the way that you could draw down from a pension. Previously, you were capped at how much you could draw from a pension, but now all limits are off. If you wanted to, and I wouldn't suggest that this is appropriate for many people, you could cash in the whole pension scheme if you wanted to. At the time, we had a few weird and wacky calls, people wanting to cash in pensions and buy a property. When we told them that that would come with a 45% tax bill, they might have changed their tune on that slightly. So it introduced 2 more acronyms in this ever growing world of acronyms that we work with as pensions experts. This thing called flexible access drawdown, and I don't know whoever dreamed this one up. It sounds like a Treasury official's dream to me, but uncrystallized funds pension lump sum. Effectively, these 2 things give a great deal of flexibility as to how money can be drawn out of a pension scheme. At the time, of course, people in DB pensions, defined benefit pensions, and they still don't have this flexibility. So we saw a large rise in the number of people that wanted to transfer out of those, gold-plated final salary schemes into a defined contribution scheme. And remember that this is a particularly difficult area where only a few advisors actually get involved with this because of the level of qualifications needed, etc. And these types of cases require qualified financial advice. People have to have the correct permissions to be able to advise in this area, and it was always prohibited for unfunded public sector schemes in any case. And remember that if you do withdraw funds from a defined contribution pension, there can be tax implications. I think we might just touch on that again a bit later in the presentation. Certainly, Rob gave the example last time round of a solicitor maybe suggesting to a client to cash in a pension only to find that the individual couldn't then rebuild their pot. So that this is a short chapter, but it does highlight where a solicitor and financial planner could work very well together. I think it's true to say that if you were looking for a more bespoke solution, where the parties might be looking to draw down capital from the pensions as part of the solution, I would say that you would definitely need to work with a financial planner here and not an actuary, because the financial planner will have real life experience of helping their own clients to draw down. And once more, I can't say this enough, do not stray into the realm of financial advice. It's you on the hook. And finally, and this wasn't in play at the point that PAG 2 was written, but of course, pensions are shortly to come into the inheritance tax net. Previously, defined contribution pensions were outside of the inheritance tax net. That was another reason why people wanted to transfer those defined benefit schemes to defined contribution schemes. However, the Chancellor recently mentioned that that advantage is likely to come to an end in 2027. Right, back to you now, Rob.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, part 9, not a lot really changed between PAG 1 and PAG 2 as far as part 9, which, as you can see, is titled Taxation of Pension Benefits on Divorce, was concerned. Excuse me. What did happen, however, outside of PAG world was the abolition of the lifetime allowance. And I think that is an important piece. That's another area where I'm sure you're going to say, of course you're going to say this, Rob, but it is an area where having an expert in this field, resolution expert, or anybody that's affiliated to resolution as a financial planner involved, just to give some extra context with perhaps the letter of instruction and the implications. But as far as this slide is concerned, I get a couple of touch points really there. The maximum contribution per year, the money purchase annual allowance, they're kind of interwoven. Jeremy touched on something I mentioned in the previous presentation with a solicitor overstepping the mark. The maximum contribution per year is important because if somebody has got divorced, then they're aiming to rebuild their pension assets post-divorce. If you did what had been advised previously, or a solicitor had recommended just emptying a pot, it means that the individual who could in theory have paid in 60,000 pounds into a pension contribution is restricted by the money purchase annual allowance, which restricts it to 10k. So that is an important point, and really what the chapter is saying to you is just be mindful. Now, that lifetime allowance being abolished.
Yeah, I remember, Rob, I think it was last March, wasn't it? March 2023, where the then Chancellor sprang this surprise on all of us and said that the lifetime allowance was now no more. I think we initially thought, great, brilliant, excellent, it's going to make our lives easier. However, I think it's true to say that probably the opposite has happened. Rob, just explain to our listeners a little bit more about why the lifetime allowance actually isn't as dead as some people might think it is.
Yeah, it was abolished, but and so therefore perhaps some of Chapter 9 is irrelevant. But the legacy of the LTA does still live on and does have relevance in divorce. Let's just talk first of all about the maximum lump sum that can be taken from a pension. Now, generically speaking, it is that you can take 25% of the value of a pot tax-free. However, there's now a cap on how much that could be. And funny enough, it's 25% of the now deceased lifetime allowance, meaning it's about 260,000 pounds that you can take out. It's also worth noting that if you come across a case that's a particularly large pension value case, that individual may have obtained protections against the old lifetime allowance. Well, those protections are still valid. So it could be that someone could be entitled to more than 25% of the value of the now deceased lifetime allowance. And things get really murky, far too murky for this session, when somebody has taken some benefits but not taken them all, and some of those benefits might be from defined benefit schemes. Well, there's now a whole certification process that needs to go on to try and understand exactly how much tax-free lump sum is available. And you might go, well, look, tax-free lump sum, is that really important for a divorce? Well, look, it might be that in certain cases it makes sense to release a tax-free lump sum for one of the pensioners to perhaps help to buy a property for them or for the other one. So it is important to be mindful of the importance of tax, and part 9 covers that one off. On to part 10.
So part 10 talks about this thing called age differential and income gap syndrome. And PAG goes on to state that large differences in age must be considered. Obvious to us, but not necessarily obvious to everybody. So again, another excerpt from PAG there. So in some cases, a pension sharing order may result in an immediate drop in income for the pension holder with no corresponding increase in income for the pension claimant, as they are too young to access the pension credit awarded. So in such a situation, one or both parties may be left unable to meet income needs if a pension sharing order is awarded. So that we're pleased that this subject warrants its own part within PAG. It is important. We do see frequently this happening. And sometimes it does require an imaginative solution to plug the income gap. Perhaps if the recipient of the pension sharing order is in their 40s, but they need immediate income now and can't access their pension funds until they're at least 55, rising to 58, then maybe there needs to be some capital set aside to provide the income during the interim. So an income gap can arise for two reasons, really. First of all, there is a large difference in ages between the parties. The second reason, less obvious, is that one party can access pension benefits early, and this might apply to perhaps the armed forces or the police pension scheme, but the recipient spouse is under the age at which they can begin to draw benefits if they were to be awarded shadow membership of that scheme as part of the divorce process. And this is probably more for you guys rather than us. Pulled out this quote. It says, "It is particularly important to consider the party's attitude to alternatives to divorce application. For example, is judicial separation a means of preserving valuable benefits?" Moving on, just to bring a little bit more life to the age differential and income gap syndrome in the context of Blue Sky's own pension sharing reports. So a brief respite from those word-heavy PowerPoint slides that we've been through. They say a picture speaks 1,000 words, and here are some charts for us to look at. So where we think that a chart may help to emphasize a particular point, we will look to insert one in our reports. And here we can see examples of Blue Sky's income profile charts. So let me just describe what we're looking at here. So before I do that, let me just once again just explain what the charts are. So the parties' ages are running along the bottom axis that you can see there, and it's important to note that this is the ages of the parties, not dates. Peter's income profile is shown by the orange line, and in our fictional example, Helen is shown by the blue line. The vertical axis denotes the level of income that each party will receive. So in our fictional example, we have been asked in the letter of instruction to calculate equality of income at age 67. So looking at chart 1, we can see that equality of income has been achieved at 67. We can see that the blue and orange lines overlap at that point as we work our way towards the right-hand side of that chart. However, what hasn't been accounted for is the fact that Peter starts to receive an income from his old defined benefit scheme at age 60. So this is one of those older schemes that has a normal retirement age that is perhaps earlier than most schemes we see today. And we can see that Peter enjoys a much higher income all the way up to age 67. And this would look to be unfair on Helen. So in chart 2, this shows how things could be done differently. So as part of our calculations, we have effectively carved out from the pension credit a pool of funds to buy Helen a matching income from her age 60. So in other words, Helen starts to receive an income at age 60 as well. So at age 67, both Helen and Peter enjoy a jump in income as state pensions and other schemes come into payment. So in this example, not only have we achieved equality of income, but also quality of income profiles, and that's something that you might wish to bear in mind when writing your letter of instruction. We can also capitalize that value. So if you imagine that period of time between the blue and the orange lines on the previous chart, on the first chart, sorry, we can give you a capital value. So once again, offsetting may be an option to plug that income gap.
Okay, that's Jeremy, those graphs look good. On to part 11, state pensions and divorce. This is really another important aspect when we're writing pension sharing reports, and in our opinion should always be included. And of course, PAG endorses it. It says state pensions are often one of the most valuable assets in a divorce, must not be ignored. It goes on to say that you should obtain forecast and consider state pensions in all cases. Qualifying state pension years can be acquired, I've got a slide coming up on that, by making national insurance contributions or by the acquisition of national insurance credits. And it goes on to say that pre-2016, something called state pension substitution is still an option for couples, but it's got to be said, that the remit now for kind of meeting that, it's going to mean that state pension substitution is going to become rarer and rarer and rarer, but it's still there, and worthy of note that it is something that a practitioner needs to be on their mettle when it comes to state pension substitution, because I suspect it could be easily forgotten because it is a rare thing. Let's move on to that next slide, Jeremy. What I wanted to highlight here was just how good the state pension scheme is. So let's just imagine, first of all, I know you can see the slide, but let's just imagine that we've got a situation where the spouse doesn't have a full state pension. They're a couple of years short. So let's understand, what can they do about it? Well, they could purchase a single year's state pension entitlement. And the cost of buying a full year is £911 this tax year. It goes up each year. And that would buy £330 worth of annual income for that £911. For those of you who haven't quite clocked this, I'm sure you all have, that effectively means that in retirement, an individual that's bought a year needs to have lived for 3 years to have recouped the £911 outlay that was in place. Now let's just compare that. Let's imagine that the pension sharing report expert had completely ignored the fact that one party had a lesser entitlement to the state pension and merely thought, look, I can even things up by sharing more of, for example, a DC pension. We can see below that we're saying that if the person was 57, to generate that £330 per annum of pension that the state pension was going to give us at 67 would have meant that £5,160 of pension would have needed to have been shared. And if the person was 62, the figure goes up. So it is significant. That state pension is fantastic. And in an ideal world, in our financial planning, with our financial planners hats on, Jeremy, we'll always try our best to make sure that a client that we see arrives at retirement time with a full state pension entitlement. But it is worth noting, and it is always worth including.
Excellent advice, Rob, and to everybody, worth checking out your own state pension forecasts online, particularly if you're getting towards that point in your life, to see if there's any gaps that you yourselves can plug. So we're on the home straight, I promise. We're going to canter through these next slides. I think we're on to the odds and sods, is what we might call it. So let's just quickly breeze through these. So part 12, additional issues. Dreaded apportionment or ring fencing comes up, of course. Apportionment of the pension according to the period of the marriage, including seamless cohabitation, is rarely appropriate. Interestingly, as soon as PAG 2 was released, we saw a spike in ring fencing calculations, so don't quite know what happened there, but we would say that they are extremely prevalent. There's more of them than there ever was, even though PAG says no, not really. So where there is a choice of pensions to share, a POD should be instructed. I think this is a really interesting point. Remember that as the POD, what we are instructed to do is to share the pensions in a way that provides the best outcome for both parties. So in other words, looks to create equality of income at the highest point for both parties. If there's numerous pension schemes, most people we come across these days have collected a number, then that's absolutely part of the analysis that goes on in the background. You won't necessarily see that, but there might be several iterations of our spreadsheet where we're kicking the tires on what pensions to share and why. Rob is just going to expand on this point in a minute, but health absolutely should be taken into account within a pension sharing report. Remember that those figures that we calculate are based on annuity rates, and annuity rates can themselves be based on an individual's life. And Rob's just going to go into a bit more detail about that now.
Yes, health and impaired health is an important point. I've stolen this slide from Just Retirement, who are one of the bigger providers out there who deal with enhanced annuities. And without talking massively through it, we can see that even little things can result in an enhancement. On the left-hand side, By the way, this is an assumption that we've got a 65-year-old with £100,000 pension pot. What is the potential annuity or income stream that they could get from that £100,000? On the left-hand side, believe it or not, the area of the country you live in can give an enhanced annuity. I shan't tell you which areas of the country get that enhancement, by the way, but you can see things like being a diabetic results in a nice little enhancement in there. Smoker does, as you probably wouldn't be surprised to learn, but also we do ask if there is a soundbite that we think that somebody is unwell, or you think someone's unwell, we will ask them to fill out a questionnaire when we're doing our pension, in order to do our pension sharing reports, and you can see the swing of income from just living in an area of the country through to something really rather substantial like stage 2 lung cancer. That can have a massive difference. Okay, part 13, Jeremy.
Part 13 is one of those chapters that does make a couple of relevant points, but we're not going to dwell on it too much today. Suffice to say that a pension sharing order cannot be varied once it has taken effect, and generally speaking, a pension sharing order cannot be made twice against the same pension from the same marriage. I'm sure that they would be quite rare occurrences, both of them, where consideration might be given to that, but today is not the day for going in deep on those.
Okay, part 14, the last of the parts or chapters within the PAG report, pensions and international issues. Yeah, look, it isn't unusual that we will be asked to make a consideration regarding an overseas pension. It is important to note it's not possible to make a pension sharing order or attachment order against a foreign pension. In most occasions, there are some oddities that we come across. UK pension providers do not recognise pension sharing orders from overseas. A pension sharing order made in a foreign court is not enforceable in this jurisdiction. But we do still make an allowance for them, or we can make an allowance for them when we're doing our calculations. All it means is that there might be a higher bias towards sharing a UK shareable pension scheme to compensate for the fact that there was a pension scheme in the US, for example. Right, moving on.
So congratulations, everybody. We have made it to the appendices. But just in case any of you felt that this is where PAGS stops, it most certainly doesn't. There's almost 100 pages of appendices to work through. And look, there are some real nuggets in the appendices. And I might just signpost you as a starter, if you like, to Appendix A, glossary of terms. If you've been with us for all 3 of our webinars over this autumn-winter period, we would have probably come up with a number of acronyms. Certainly Mike in his session, Pension Basics, would have mentioned a number of things where the glossary of terms can expand on those points. Appendix C, who can be instructed as a POD or a single joint expert. So we are still quizzed regularly. Are we an actuary? No, we're not an actuary. We are financial planners who do pension sharing reports, and we are PODs. So that's a really good section to look at. There's a specimen letter of instruction. I think we've highlighted that there's one also on our website before, but there is also one in the appendices in PAG. Post-order implementation issues. I think that's quite a good section. It talks about issues around who pays the fees, how long these things take, what paperwork might be required, etc. So definitely one to have a look at. And certainly for anybody that's feeling particularly brave, complexities around certain public sector schemes, obviously, these could be a whole series of webinars in themselves. So if anybody wants to go and dive into that, then you can read about McLeod and things like that too. So lots of juicy morsels in the appendices. Okay, well,
As we draw this to a close, I thought I'd just pop in the blue sky slide that just sort of says the various different stages perhaps of divorce and where we might help. I also thought I'd overlay it with the items that very specifically are covered within the PAG report. So whilst you might think, oh, it's blue sky, we're writing pension sharing reports, it's that piece in the middle, the POD report. The reality is that if you look at the PAG report in its totality, it shows itself up in multiple points in the process, not just that pension sharing report. Okay, Jeremy, bring us to a close.
Right, okay, everybody. So I think we've got another 2 or 3 minutes. So I don't know how busy the Q&As have been, but I know that Jack and Mike have been behind the scenes manning them. And if anybody does have any final questions, then please feel free to make use of our last 5 minutes today. So we really appreciate you setting aside the time to listen into our webinar. We're really busy. We know all the pressures that are on you guys in terms of the work that you have. So it really, we really do appreciate you setting aside the time today. Look, we hope that you've found our series interesting and informative. Of course, we're always up for ideas. If there are particular sessions that you would like us to run, then do get in touch, because if you're thinking it, then I'm sure others are as well. And remember that we also offer our services to come to your office. We don't charge any fees for that. We just hope that the coffee is good. So if there are any of you out there that would like us to put on a session bespoke for the team, either in person or perhaps via Teams or Zoom, then we're more than happy to do that. And last of all, this really does help us to frame and shape up those future sessions. We do have a survey monkey, though this is, I think, 6 or 7 questions. It's not going to take you long at all. You can see the QR code there for those that aren't so technically minded. You might want to just make a note of that link. But if you were to go on that and just give us your thoughts, then that would really help us. Of course, feel also free to approach us directly. So if many of you will have our various email addresses. If you don't, go onto the website, there'll be an email address for the business. Let us know your thoughts. We're always happy to help. That's the type of people that we are, I like to think. But thanks once more for attending our session today. I'm not sure if Rob has just got any final messages.
No, I have checked in with Mike and with Jack, and they tell me that they've been able to pick off the questions as they've gone through. Perhaps we might leave the session open until midday. It's another 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll kind of hide in the background and just see if there's any extra questions, and we'll try our best to answer them. But that was a pretty mammoth session to go through today, so I'm very pleased we've delivered you to the end before midday, because let me tell you, in the test run it was a lot longer than that, but equally I do think hopefully maybe there might be a few survey monkey bits where we can actually do a session on proper good worked examples of offsetting, perhaps in our next batch of webinars. I'll put it on to mute for the time being, but I've got my ear open to any further questions if we can help. Thank you. Right, well, I think in the circumstances we'll close the session off. All that remains is for the team here at Blue Sky to wish you a Merry Christmas and catch up with you in 2025.